Alright, now we're going to have a look at this transcript of a speech from the first speaker for the affirmative side in the debate on the proposition Australia's endangered Indigenous languages should be protected. So, as we have a look through this one, we definitely have an authoritative tone because this speaker uses a lot of research. So if we have a look at the statistic of 7,000 languages in the world, that's used so that when they talk about 50% being lost, there is a massive sense of loss from the audience because the figure was so big, so high. Note that the word sadly in the opening really sets the tone for this speaker's part of the debate. So from the very beginning, he's encouraging the audience to feel a sense of sadness and a sense of loss. We have a range of authorities used in the opening, Alliance for Linguistic Diversity and also Google. So this is meant to give the statistics and facts a sense of irrefutable credibility in the audience's mind. Now, when we have these phrases economically powerful and less powerful, we kind of have the connotations of oppression and victimization, like something very powerful is taking advantage of something very weak. So, from the outset, this feels very unfair, and the audience would be inclined to want to rectify that imbalance of powers. He continues on with some emotive language like dramatic and tragic, again trying to enhance that mood. Now, the words down here are quite significant. I'm skipping a lot of this because a lot of this is, statistics and that sort of thing. Linguicide and killing. Okay, so throughout this whole piece, he tends to personify language as being a living thing that can be murdered or killed. So, the audience might not generally have very strong feelings about languages, but they'd have strong feelings about whether it's right to murder or kill people. So by creating that association between language and a living thing or a living person, they're able to associate their feelings of what how they react to killing to the idea of languages. Now, this motif of death is further enhanced in the image. As you can see, it's set in a cemetery. So again, in a cemetery, we're encouraged to mourn the passing of people. So in this case, we need to mourn for these languages. The choice of word categories, endangered, highly endangered, extinct, again plays on this notion. Now, having Australia obviously on the graph here shows that we are amongst the countries with the most language of with the most languages at risk. It's getting late. Anyway, so that really localizes the issue and shows that we have some responsibility to play. Now, down the bottom, we talk about, they talk about children. Most children speak language but are restricted to certain domains. Children no longer learn language at home. So by reading the fine print, the audience can see that the education of children plays a very important role in this issue, and that they can easily identify where some changes could be made in order to rectify the problem. Okay, so moving on, we have this reference in this paragraph down here to sleeping beauties and being woken. So fairy tales are pretty common cultural knowledge, and most of the audience would be very familiar with Sleeping Beauty. So by creating this association with something that they're familiar with, it's like using a metaphor. It's like using an analogy. They can understand more clearly that languages are something that can be revitalized. Now, there are some references, and I'm jumping a little bit and I'll come back in a second, but to Australia being a world leader. And this can be contrasted with this idea that we are sort of among the 10 worst to being the leaders. Now, due to national pride, which is further played on where is it? Later on, I'll show you when I get to it. There's a strong sense of national pride in that the audience, being Australians, would want their country to be, really high and successful and number one instead of being some of the worst. So in order to support their sense of nationalism and patriotism and to support their country, they will encourage any move that would enable their country to be ranked more highly, and in this case that includes better conservation and preservation of languages. So by listing off all these things the government have mentioned that could be done to preserve the languages, we see that there is a multitude of possibilities and methods that can be implemented. So by having such a variety of strategies, we have less excuses, or the audience has less excuses to take some kind of action. When they juxtapose language with identity in this paragraph, the loss of memory, you no longer know who you are, this places a lot higher significance on the importance of language. So the audience, who again may not be as concerned about linguistics or language, might be better able to empathize and relate to this idea of losing one's identity. So because they could think of how awful that must be, they can relate with the story of Kathy King, her personal story, the anecdote there, and understand from her perspective and in relation to losing identity why language is so important. And again, phrases like benefits for wider Australian society. This is an important phrase because it appeals to self-interest, so that we can see that it's not just about the Indigenous culture, it is going to benefit others as well, therefore showing that we have a vested interest. Okay, yes, this is what I was mentioning from what we were talking about just before with that notion of national pride. So all those sorts of quotes could be all grouped together when you talk about the way that they're trying to use national pride to persuade the audience. Here, cooperation and harmony, again, are values that we tend to rate quite highly in Australian society. So by appealing to these values, the Australian audience is positioned to think more favourably about the preservation of language. Now down here we have words like wealth, treasure and priceless, and in the following paragraph we have the word investing. So this is putting things in monetary terms by making us feel that if we invest time and resources, we will be reimbursed. So we will have greater wealth, treasure, and what we will receive will be of priceless value. So generally, since money is the currency that keeps the world turning, as they say, the audience will see anything that is suggested to give them greater wealth as being positive. Okay, there are a couple of cliches down here. Time is of the essence. The clock is unfortunately constantly ticking, and these create a sense of urgency. So the clock is unfortunately ticking, time is running out, time is of the essence. So the readers will be inclined to feel like something needs to be done straight away. Unique, beautiful, irreplaceable. Listing all these adjectives tends to make us feel, again, very positively about language. It's describing it in a way that it will feel like it's something that we really want to hold on to, because these are all words that describe things that, we treasure.